Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Rebecca Alsup was last seen in Williamsville, Missouri, on February 17, 2017. On that day, a friend visited her home around 1 p.m. to check on her. Alsup lived with her husband, Craig Allen Wood, in a camping trailer located on Wood's parents' property. During the visit, Alsup appeared distressed, freaking out and shaking, and she confided in her friend that her husband had stolen money from her and had even gone as far as cutting up the SIM card in her phone. Alsup showed her friend the destroyed SIM card, as well as bruises on her left cheek and arm. She claimed that Wood had pulled her off the bed by her hair. Clearly frightened, Alsup borrowed her friend's phone and made a call, telling the person on the other end that Wood had stolen from her and that she was scared for her safety. Later that evening, a man came by the trailer and saw both Alsup and Wood there, though things seemed normal at the time. The next day, when the man returned, Alsup was no longer there, but he noticed something unsettling. Her walker was in the burned barrel, still burning. This was the last confirmed sighting of Alsup, and she has never been heard from again. The couple's relationship had been described as stormy by numerous witnesses. Around the time of her disappearance, Alsup had allegedly confided in another witness about a disturbing conversation with her husband. She claimed that Wood had been caught with drugs and had tried to pressure her into becoming an informant, threatening to kill her if she refused. Alsup had begged the witness to come and get her, but by the time he arrived, she was gone. This chain of events was further complicated by the testimony of a third witness, who claimed that Wood had forced his son to help dispose of Alsup's body. The witness's son stated that after the disappearance, individuals, whose identities he refused to reveal, used his car to transport something. When the car was returned, it was covered in blood and hair. The son cleaned the car and sold it, and when the authorities traced the buyer, he reported that the car was extremely clean when he purchased it. The buyer later sold the car to a scrapyard, where it was crushed. There was also an eerie account from a man who, in 2016, had been offered an unsettling deal by Wood. Wood allegedly asked him to kill Alsup in exchange for several cars, a motorcycle, and half of Alsup's life insurance policy. In a particularly chilling conversation, Wood asked the witness what would happen if bong water from a methamphetamine pipe were injected into Alsup's legs. The witness responded that he believed it would eventually cause her death. Not long after this conversation, Alsup was hospitalized, and doctors had to amputate both of her legs due to complications. While she was in the hospital, Wood attempted to have her removed from life support, but the hospital refused, knowing it was against Alsup's wishes and that Wood could not prove he was her legal husband at the time. Following the amputation, Wood reportedly told the witness that he had injected Alsup with the bong water, but it hadn't killed her. He allegedly claimed that he knew many places where he could hide her body where it would never be found. In a particularly damning statement, another person who had shared a jail cell with Wood later testified that Wood had confessed to killing Alsup, crying and saying that he shouldn't have killed Becky. In July 2019, Wood was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree assault in relation to Alsup's case. The assault charge stemmed from the 2016 incident involving the bong water injection. According to court documents, investigators believed that Wood had killed Alsup by striking her in the head with an ashtray. However, in September 2019, the charges were dismissed at the request of the prosecution, who stated that there was not enough evidence to proceed with the case, though they promised to refile charges in the future. Despite the initial charges being dropped, foul play is strongly suspected in Alsup's disappearance due to the disturbing evidence and circumstances surrounding her case. Liran Stallings graduated from R.E. Hunt High School in 1956, a pivotal moment in her early life that set the stage for the events that would follow. After graduation, she moved to New Orleans, Louisiana, with a man named Eddie Stallings. The couple's relationship was tumultuous from the start. Eventually, Liran returned to her hometown of Columbus, Mississippi, bringing with her a baby girl. Eddie, not one to let go, followed her back to Columbus, and their volatile relationship picked up once again. However, it was clear that Eddie was controlling, and he was involved in drugs, which only added further strain to their troubled relationship. The details of whether they were legally married remain unclear, but what is certain is that Eddie's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began seeing other women and eventually married one of them, claiming she was pregnant with his child. In the meantime, Liran found herself involved with Sonny Lucas, a distant relative, in a relationship that seemed to be an attempt to escape Eddie's manipulative grip. By the summer of 1960, Liran had made the decision to leave Columbus. She was determined to start a new life in St. Louis, Missouri, where she planned to stay with her aunt, find a job, and provide a better life for herself and her daughter. She left her baby, who was only 8 months old at the time, with her sister, planning to return in August when her sister's baby was due. Once her sister gave birth, the two women had plans to travel to St. Louis together. However, Liran never returned to Columbus, and what happened next remains a mystery. Liran's aunt reported that after Liran arrived in St. Louis, she stayed with her briefly before heading to either Needham, Massachusetts, or Bridgeport, Connecticut, where she had arranged a job as a live-in maid. According to her aunt, Liran and Sonny Lucas, who had also moved to St. Louis, got into a violent argument on the night she left. This fight has been described as a knockdown, drag-out altercation, but it's unclear whether it was a sign of deeper problems or something that set off a chain of events leading to her disappearance. From that point onward, Liran vanished. She never contacted her family again, and over time, their concern grew. Despite this, no missing persons report was filed immediately, and Liran's family struggled with the uncertainty of her whereabouts. They grew increasingly worried, especially after they noticed there was no evidence that anyone had ever used her social security number or had any contact with her. As the years passed, Liran's family was left with more questions than answers. Her daughter, who would have been the one most desperate for answers, is now deceased, as are her parents. One of her brothers has also passed, but Liran still has 6 surviving siblings who have never stopped searching for answers. They are the ones who eventually pushed for a missing persons report to be filed, rekindling the investigation into her disappearance. Columbus police are now investigating Liran's case, but it remains unresolved. Betty Alexander was last seen in Sullivan, Missouri, on April 10, 2019. That afternoon, her neighbor saw her gardening outside, and it appeared that she had taken the medication she was supposed to take at 7 p.m. since it was no longer in her home later that evening. However, Betty was never seen again after that evening. It is believed that she disappeared sometime between 7 p.m. on April 10th and the morning of April 11th, as she did not take her 7 a.m. medication the following day. She has not been heard from since. 4 days later, on April 14th, Betty's daughter went to her mother's apartment on South Center Street. When she arrived, the door was locked. After unlocking it, she entered the apartment and was immediately struck by the unsettling sight of her mother's Meals on Wheels delivery still sitting on the table, alongside a glass of milk. There were no signs of her mother being there, though the purse that Betty always carried was found in the closet, containing her wallet, medications, and state identification card. Curiously, inside her purse were 2 envelopes containing $200 in cash, $100 in each envelope. This money was a mystery to Betty's daughter, who had been handling her mother's finances and paying her bills since the death of Betty's husband. The sight of her mother's glasses on the recliner added to the eerie absence. However, the most telling sign was a scratch on the glass of the screen door, suggesting that there may have been a disturbance, though it was not enough to definitively confirm a struggle. The keys to the apartment were still inside, and one item was notably missing: one of the 2 boxes of fentanyl patches that had been delivered to Betty on April 10th. She used these patches to manage back pain. The second box of patches remained in the apartment, suggesting that the missing box had been taken, though by whom or why is unclear. Betty's daughter noted that her mother didn't drive, didn't go for walks, and had no experience with computers or cell phones, making it highly unlikely that Betty left on her own accord. Despite an extensive search of the area, there was no trace of Betty Alexander. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain unclear, and her case remains unsolved. Gary Akers was last seen in Union, Missouri, on December 11, 1988, when he left his home at 11:30 p.m. to borrow a chainsaw from a neighbor so that he could cut wood for his family's wood stove. Around midnight, Akers stopped at Mom's Hilltop Tavern in Groveville, Missouri, where he purchased a 6-pack of beer. After that, he never returned home, and he has not been heard from again. The following morning, at around 8 a.m. on December 12th, Akers' wife of 11 years discovered his black Jeep abandoned just off Route FF at the entrance to the subdivision where they lived with their 4 children. The vehicle was found with 4 cans of beer inside and the keys hidden above the sun visor, but there were no signs of violence or any indication of where Akers might have gone. A thorough search of the area yielded no clues, and he seemed to have vanished without a trace. Authorities have speculated that foul play may have been involved in his disappearance, especially since Akers had been involved with marijuana and methamphetamine at the time, something his wife was completely unaware of. He had also been threatened prior to his disappearance, and after he went missing, his wife began receiving threatening phone calls, forcing her to move. At the time of his disappearance, Akers worked the night shift at the assembly line of the Ford Motor Co. in Hazelwood. Just before his disappearance, he had bought Christmas presents for his children, further indicating he had no intention of abandoning his family. His wife does not believe he would have voluntarily left them, and his brother and sister-in-law have since expressed the belief that he is no longer alive. Despite ongoing efforts, Gary Akers' case remains unsolved, with his whereabouts still a mystery. Marilyn Brinson's husband of 30 years, John L. Brinson, stated that the last time he saw her was on the night of July 16, 2002, at their home in the 2000 block of Northeast Russell Road in Northland, Kansas. According to John, Marilyn went to bed as usual, and when he woke up the following morning, she was gone. Assuming she had left for work, he did not immediately find her absence alarming, but when her boss called later that day to ask why she had not shown up, his concern grew. An unsettling discovery was made inside their home. Marilyn's wedding ring was left behind on the dresser, an unusual detail that suggested she had not left voluntarily. The situation took a grim turn when authorities located Marilyn's car, a green four-door 1995 Ford Taurus, abandoned in the middle of 24th Street near Topping Avenue. The vehicle had been burned, but more disturbing than the fire itself was the gruesome evidence left behind. Inside the car, police found a substantial amount of Marilyn's blood, not just in small traces but splattered throughout the interior, pooling on the dashboard, the passenger seat, and the floorboards. Further investigation led them to her apartment complex's parking lot, where even more of her blood was discovered. The sheer volume of blood found at both locations led investigators to a grim conclusion. Marilyn had suffered fatal injuries and could not have survived. Less than a month later, on August 14th, authorities charged John Brinson with his wife's murder. The most damning evidence against him was the discovery of his handprint in Marilyn's blood inside the trunk of her car, an indication that he had handled her body after she was already gravely injured or deceased. Police theorized that he had attacked her, possibly by shooting her, causing her to bleed to death, and then disposed of her remains in or near the Missouri River. Their adult sons later revealed that their parents had been arguing the night before Marilyn disappeared, and John himself admitted that he had recently learned Marilyn was having an affair. Despite the mounting evidence against him, John steadfastly maintained his innocence. His first trial, held in June 2005, ended in a mistrial, but in October 2006, he was retried convicted of Marilyn's murder, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the time of her disappearance, Marilyn worked at a Texaco Star Mart station at US 169 and Northeast 68th Street in Northland, while John was employed as a heavy machinery operator. Together, they had 4 children. Luther Boyd was born and raised in Bogalusa, Louisiana, and later moved to Kansas City, Missouri, in 1966. He found steady work at City Hall and eventually retired in 1989 after serving as the director of vital statistics. After retiring, Boyd's life took on a more leisurely pace, as he purchased a mansion on Jansen Place and filled his time with 2 of his greatest passions, collecting antiques and traveling. He hosted lavish parties at his mansion, some of which had over 100 guests, and enjoyed a reputation as a charming and sociable man. His friends and loved ones described him as someone who loved to entertain, living a life full of energy and generosity. In the summer of 2000, Boyd made the decision to sell his grand home. The sale was a bittersweet occasion for him, and he began preparing to move into a new apartment in Kansas City. Though he was ready for the change, he had mixed feelings about leaving behind the mansion he had loved for so long. He arranged to continue living in the house until December 2000, and by November 25th, most of his furniture had been moved to his new place. Boyd spent that day helping the movers relocate his belongings, and though it was a busy time, his friends said he was in good spirits. He seemed happy to be moving forward with his life, eager to embrace the next chapter. Later that evening, on November 25th, Boyd visited Buddy's Bar on Main Street in Kansas City. He wasn't known to be a heavy drinker, but he enjoyed socializing, and that night he had a couple of glasses of wine. Friends who were with him at the bar later recalled that he was in good spirits, having a pleasant time, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He left the bar alone at approximately 2:30 a.m. on November 26th, telling those he spoke with that he had plans to meet friends the next morning. That was the last anyone ever heard from him. The movers who were scheduled to finish moving Boyd's furniture the next morning arrived at his mansion to find that he was missing. His friends began searching for him, growing concerned when they couldn't get in touch with him. Boyd's family in Louisiana was contacted, and they too began to worry. The discovery of his wallet, with all of his credit cards and casino cards intact, only deepened the mystery. Boyd was known to gamble on occasion, but his friends confirmed that he would have taken his casino cards with him if he were planning a visit to a casino. This made it seem unlikely that he had simply gone off on a spontaneous trip. On November 27th, 2 days after Boyd disappeared, his dark green 1998 Nissan Infiniti Q45T was found abandoned in Penn Valley Park near the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City. The vehicle was locked, and inside, $360 in cash was discovered underneath one of the floor mats. The cash had been withdrawn from an ATM earlier that morning, and it was known that Boyd had intended to use the money to pay the movers in cash. His car's location raised even more questions, as there was no sign of him at the scene, and he had no known connection to the area around Penn Valley Park. An extensive search of the park and surrounding areas yielded no further clues as to Boyd's whereabouts. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Boyd had planned to visit Louisiana in December 2000 to help care for his dying father. His father passed away on November 29th, just 3 days after Boyd vanished, and on Boyd's 60th birthday. His family said it was completely out of character for him to leave without a word, especially considering the family circumstances at the time. There were some theories that Boyd's sexual orientation might have been a factor in his disappearance, as Boyd was openly gay. However, there was no concrete evidence to support this idea. Boyd was not known to associate with anyone near Penn Valley Park, and there was no apparent reason why his car would have been found there. His case became even more puzzling when he was declared legally dead in 2007, despite the fact that his body had never been found. The authorities continue to suspect foul play in Boyd's disappearance, and they have not given up on finding out what happened to him. Luther Boyd's case remains unsolved. Geneva Adams was last seen at the Artesian Lounge in Herculaneum, Missouri, on July 25, 1976. That evening, She asked her daughter to drive her to the bar so she could meet a man named Jimmy Lee Mills, a regular patron there whom she had met earlier. At the bar, Adams appeared to be in high spirits as she danced with Mills and seemed very happy. Mills, after spending time with her, offered to drive Adams home. However, she was never heard from again. According to Mills, they left the bar when it closed, and he claimed they went to an after-hours bar in East St. Louis, Missouri, but when they arrived, the bar was closed. He said he then dropped Adams off at a donut shop located on Highway 61 in Crystal City, Missouri, at approximately 4 a.m. and watched her walk inside. After that, Geneva Adams vanished without a trace. Despite Mills' account, there was no further communication from Adams, and no one else reported seeing her after that point. Mills was known to have a criminal background. He had been convicted of attempted rape and released from prison in 1975, just a year before Adams disappeared. At the time she went missing, he was out on bail while awaiting trial for the rape of a teenage girl. He was later convicted in that case, but only received probation and a suspended sentence. Mills' criminal history also included convictions for receiving stolen property, escape, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. In the years following Adams' disappearance, Mills' name came up again in connection to another woman, 21-year-old Cynthia Horan, who disappeared from her St. Louis apartment in July 1985. Horan lived next door to Mills, and he was considered a suspect in her case. However, investigators were unable to gather enough evidence to charge him. In 1988, the remains of Cynthia Horan were found in a shallow grave in Jefferson County, Missouri, but they were not identified until 2011. Despite the discovery, no one has ever been charged in Horan's death. Mills has consistently maintained his innocence in both Horan's disappearance and the case of Geneva Adams, insisting he has no idea what happened to her. As of now, Mills is serving time in prison and was scheduled to be released in 2019. Geneva Adams was born and raised in Arkansas and had been living in Festus, Missouri, at the time she went missing. She was a devoted member of the Pentecostal church and had 10 children, 2 of whom were still living at home when she disappeared. Her first husband passed away in 1969, and her second marriage ended in divorce. Although she didn't drink much and it was out of character for her to go to bars, she had gone to the Artesian Lounge on the night she vanished, which raised concerns among those who knew her. Her case remains unsolved, with foul play strongly suspected. Despite the many years that have passed since her disappearance, the mystery surrounding Geneva Adams' fate continues to linger. Charles Bell was last seen on September 15, 2011, at the intersection of Dripping Springs Road and Red Rock Road, just outside Harrisburg, Missouri. He was riding his red 2009 Ducati motorcycle, bearing the Missouri license plate number BP4GU. At 1:09 p.m. that day, Bell's cellular phone pinged off a tower at Route J and Interstate 70, a location that may indicate he had reached Columbia, Missouri. Bell had made plans to meet up with friends for a hunting trip, an activity he thoroughly enjoyed, but he never showed up to the meeting, and he was never heard from again. 3 days later, on September 18th, his loved ones reported him missing. Despite the initial search efforts, there was no sign of Bell, and his case soon took a chilling turn. By July 2014, the investigation into Bell's disappearance took a significant shift when Jennifer R. Freeman and Patrick R. Curl were charged with hindering prosecution and evidence tampering in relation to Bell's presumed death. The two individuals told authorities that Bell had been shot and killed, and they confessed to helping clean up the crime scene and dispose of his body. The details they provided suggested that Bell had been murdered at his own home, but no one has been officially charged with his death. Freeman and Curl both pled guilty to the charges and were sentenced to prison terms, 3 years for Curl and 6 years for Freeman. While these charges brought some closure to the case in terms of the details surrounding Bell's murder, it also raised more questions about who was ultimately responsible for taking his life. The mystery surrounding Bell's disappearance deepened when his loved ones noted a change in his behavior shortly before he went missing. Bell, who worked as a self-employed construction laborer, had made a series of unusual financial decisions leading up to his disappearance. He had prepaid $75,000 to a lumber company for construction supplies, and he had also loaned hundreds of thousands of dollars to various individuals, some of whom may have been acquaintances or business partners. These financial actions suggested Bell was either planning something significant or perhaps becoming involved in matters that could have put him at risk. By 2016, on the 5th anniversary of Bell's disappearance, his father took a legal step to have him declared legally dead. Bell was worth $1.2 million at the time of his disappearance, and his father intended to petition the court to be appointed the administrator of his estate. His plan was to set up a trust fund for Bell's 3 daughters, who were left without their father under tragic and mysterious circumstances. Bell's case is being treated as a homicide, though the full details surrounding his death remain unclear. Diana Broner's disappearance remains one of the most haunting and perplexing cases in recent Missouri history. On the night of March 19, 1987, Diana, a 20-year-old woman, clocked out of her shift at Venture, a discount department store in the Twin City Mall in Crystal City. She had made it clear to her coworkers that she was in a hurry to get home, and as was typical for her, she exited the building through the back door and headed toward the parking lot. Her car, a 1982 Pontiac, was parked in a well-lit area, and though other employees were still inside, Diana was likely alone in the parking lot when something terrible happened. She was last seen speaking to a man in the lot, who appeared to be loitering around the store. When the parking lot was later searched, her car remained undisturbed, but Diana was gone without a trace. The unsettling nature of this case lies in the sheer lack of evidence. No signs of struggle, no witnesses reporting any unusual sounds, no physical clues left behind. In a world where crimes often leave behind some form of evidence, be it a purse, clothing, or even the smallest scrap of hair, nothing was found to indicate where Diana had gone or how she'd been taken. For over 3 decades, this unsolved case has cast a shadow of grief over her family and a long-running mystery that still captivates those who study unsolved disappearances. What is particularly unnerving about Diana's case is the complete absence of clear answers. No one knows for sure why Diana was targeted or what the motives were behind her abduction. Did she know her abductor? Was she stalked before the incident, or was this a random act of violence? Many theories have emerged, but with so little to go on, there's a chilling uncertainty about what exactly happened to her that night. Diana had worked a full shift that evening, working the cash register, and had interacted with several customers. A key moment that has been scrutinized by investigators was when Diana rang up the last customer of her shift, a man who acted strangely and seemed to hang around, as if waiting for someone. Did this man know Diana? Was he the same person who was later seen speaking to her in the parking lot? Unfortunately, there are no definitive answers. The last known description of the man came from a witness who saw Diana talking to a man, but little was gleaned about what was said or how the interaction unfolded. This mysterious man remains a key figure in the investigation, but despite numerous leads and theories, the case went cold. The absence of a struggle in the parking lot raises many questions. Would Diana have stopped to speak to a stranger? Or was it more likely that the person was someone she knew? Some suggest she may have been approached by someone she trusted, perhaps someone she knew from a modeling class she had been taking before her disappearance. In the weeks leading up to the night she disappeared, Diana had started to take modeling lessons, so the theory suggests it's possible someone from that class may have become fixated on her, and over time began stalking her. Another theory is that the abductor knew exactly where to find Diana. The timing of the crime suggests it wasn't random. Someone knew her schedule, knew that she was working that night, and knew when she would be leaving. This theory suggests that whoever took her may have been waiting in the lot for just the right moment. There were still other employees working that night, so Diana wasn't alone in the mall, but it was late, and the parking lot wasn't likely to be crowded. Whoever took her would have known the area well, especially the best times to strike when the mall was closing and the parking lot would be nearly empty. The fact that there was no sign of a struggle and no one reported hearing anything unusual suggests that the abduction was planned and executed with precision. There's another key factor to consider: the possibility that Diana was forced into the vehicle quietly. Did her abductor use a weapon to threaten her? Was she forced to cooperate? Or did she willingly get into the car with someone she knew or thought she could trust? In many abductions, victims are often forced into vehicles by force or under the threat of harm. But this case is different. No reports from witnesses mention hearing screams, seeing a struggle, or noticing a vehicle speed off suddenly. The possibility that Diana went quietly without causing a scene raises more questions about the relationship between her and the person who took her. Was it someone from her past? Someone who knew her well enough to catch her off guard? The lack of evidence, no clothing, no purse, no hair strands, suggests the abductor took great care in ensuring that nothing was left behind. It's been theorized that she may have even willingly gotten into the vehicle, perhaps to talk or for some other reason. Investigators have considered a range of suspects, many of whom were known to have committed similar crimes. One of the most notorious is Tommy Lynn Sells, a man who, over the years, has confessed to numerous unsolved murders across the United States. Sells' involvement in Diana's case remains speculative, as there's no direct evidence linking him to the crime. While he has confessed to a long list of murders, including some that took place after Diana's disappearance, there's no verifiable proof he was in Missouri at the time of her abduction. Still, the nature of his confessions, which often involve cases he may not have been responsible for, raises the possibility that Sells could have been involved, even though he has never named Diana as one of his victims. Another suspect in the case is Larry Dwayne Hall, a man known for his alleged involvement in numerous abductions and murders, particularly in the Midwest. Hall has been linked to the disappearances of several women, and while investigators have explored the possibility of his connection to Diana's case, there's little solid evidence to support the claim. Hall's involvement in other similar cases makes it tempting to connect him to Diana's disappearance, but like Sells, there's no direct evidence to suggest he was involved. The most likely suspect in Diana's case, however, is Marvin Chaney. Chaney was active in the area around the time of Diana's disappearance and was involved in a string of violent crimes, including abductions and murders. His name surfaced in the investigation into Diana's disappearance, especially when similarities were found between her case and the abduction of other women, such as Angela Hammond and Cheryl Kinney, both of whom disappeared under strikingly similar circumstances. Like Diana, these women were taken from parking lots at night, and in each case, there were reports of a man speaking to the victim beforehand. Chaney's connection to these cases has been explored in depth, but the problem remains that no definitive evidence has ever been found to link him directly to Diana's disappearance. Despite this, investigators have not ruled him out, especially since he fits the description of the man seen speaking to Diana that night. As time has passed, the case has grown colder, with few new leads emerging. In 2007, there was a renewed focus on Marvin Chaney and his possible connection to the case. But as with all previous investigations, nothing conclusive was discovered. The families of the victims, especially Diana's, have never given up hope. Marvin Broner, Diana's father, has kept the hope alive in interviews, despite the long years of silence and unanswered questions. In an interview, he expressed that though the odds of Diana being found alive were slim, he would continue to hold on to hope as long as it was possible. This ongoing dedication to finding answers is one of the few things that has kept the case from completely fading from memory, despite the lack of new developments. As the 36th anniversary of Diana's disappearance approaches, the chances of finding answers seem slimmer than ever. The case is cold, with no new evidence, and many of the potential suspects have either died or are unlikely to be connected to the crime. Without a breakthrough, a confession, the discovery of new evidence, or even the discovery of Diana's body, this tragic case may remain unsolved indefinitely. It is a case that speaks to the profound pain of uncertainty, the horror of a life snatched away, and the heartache of a family left in the dark for more than 3 decades. Diana Broner's disappearance remains one of the many unsolved mysteries that continue to haunt the world, a case still waiting for someone to step forward with the truth. Sherry Barnes was last seen in January 1987, under mysterious and troubling circumstances involving her mother's death and her stepfather's involvement. In 1986, Sherry's mother, Elizabeth and Turek Vassar, and her stepfather, Larry Vassar, had custody of her and lived in St. Louis, Missouri, after moving there from Nashville, Tennessee. However, Elizabeth's life took a tragic turn that year when she vanished from the family's home in St. Louis on December 1st, 1986. Elizabeth's body wasn't discovered until February 1987, more than 2 months later, when her remains were found in the Mississippi River. Her death was ruled a homicide, but there was no sign of Sherry at the scene, raising immediate questions about the fate of the young girl. Elizabeth's profession, which included working as a prostitute for her husband Larry on Independence Avenue in St. Louis, would later add complexity to the case, complicating the investigation into both her death and Sherry's disappearance. For years, Elizabeth's body remained unidentified until her family finally made the connection between her disappearance and the unsolved case of a missing woman. They alerted authorities, leading to an official investigation into both Elizabeth's death and Sherry's whereabouts. Sherry's disappearance was first noted around January 7, 1987, when she was allegedly seen in Kansas City, Missouri, with her stepfather, Larry Vassar. This was the last confirmed sighting of the girl, and she has not been heard from since. Larry Vassar would later be found incarcerated in the mid-1990s for armed robbery, where he would remain imprisoned until at least 2028. His role in Sherry's disappearance became the focus of investigation, as authorities tried to piece together the circumstances surrounding her vanishing. Larry's statements to investigators were disturbing and highly dubious. He told authorities that he knew exactly where Sherry was and claimed she was being looked after by family members in the Kansas City area. According to Larry, Sherry was living under a different name and possibly unaware that she was a missing child. At one point, Larry even offered to provide Elizabeth's mother with photographs of Sherry and a recording of her voice, but only if she paid him $500, a request that raised red flags about his motivations and the truth of his claims. It was also revealed that Sherry was supposed to remain in the custody of other relatives following her mother's death, further complicating the timeline and circumstances of her disappearance. Larry's claims that she was being taken care of by family members, coupled with his refusal to fully cooperate with investigators, led authorities to classify Sherry's case as a non-family abduction. This classification was rare, especially considering Larry's close relationship to Sherry, but the lack of evidence supporting his claims or any tangible leads regarding her current location made this case stand out. Despite the many years that have passed, Sherry Barnes' case remains unsolved. The mystery of her disappearance is further compounded by her stepfather's cryptic statements, his time in prison, and the ongoing uncertainty surrounding her fate. On the night of August 5, 1989, Lieutenant Keith Despain was working the overnight shift at the Fredericktown Police Department in Fredericktown, Missouri. Despain, a man who had lived nearly his entire life in the small town, knew the pulse of the community better than anyone. His father had worked in law enforcement, as had his grandfather, making his own path into law enforcement almost inevitable. It wasn't surprising, then, that he would rise through the ranks to become the city's police chief. Despain's memory of that night, one of the most tragic and baffling in the town's history, remained vivid in his mind for years. It was a hot and muggy August evening, a typical summer night in small-town Missouri. The night seemed as routine as any other, nothing out of the ordinary, just another slow shift. However, everything changed when an event occurred that would forever change the course of the town's history: the disappearance of a 13-year-old girl named Gina Brooks. Earlier that evening, Gina had been watching her brother's baseball game at a local field, a common activity for kids in the small town. The game ended around 10 p.m., and after saying goodnight to her mother, Cindy Box, who had gone to bed, Gina told her brother that she was going for a bike ride. It was 10:30 p.m. when Gina left the house dressed in a blue striped top, white shorts, and sneakers. She rode off through the quiet streets of Fredericktown, her bike cutting through the cool evening air. What happened next would change everything. Gina was soon confronted by the occupants of an old, battered station wagon as she rode past the First Street Baptist Church. Witnesses later reported seeing the car follow her, but Gina kept riding. She eventually turned the corner on a high street, where she stopped to talk to her boyfriend. The station wagon came into view once again. This time, there was a scream. The station wagon sped off, driving away with Gina inside. Her bike was found at around 2 a.m. that same night. At 2 a.m., Cindy woke up to find her daughter's room empty. Panic set in. She immediately called the police, and within moments, Lieutenant Despain was on the case. When Cindy reported that Gina was missing, particularly with the detail about the bike, it hit Despain like a brick. The significance of the bike Gina had been riding it just moments before was now a key piece of evidence. By dawn, Fredericktown was flooded with law enforcement personnel from the city, county, and federal agencies. Posters went up, yellow ribbons were hung, and the small town was thrust into the national spotlight. There were marches, vigils, and an outpouring of support from the community, all rallying behind the search for Gina. Over time, Gina would become a symbol for cold cases across the St. Louis area. Days turned into weeks, then months, and years went by without any substantial leads. The case seemed to go cold, but then, nearly 2 decades later, a letter arrived from Connecticut. At first, the letter seemed unrelated, but it would prove to be a crucial turning point. The letter was written by the mother of a young woman named Laura Michelle Dinwiddie, who had been murdered in St. Louis in 1975. The case had gone unsolved for years, but the letter from Dinwiddie's mother implored the authorities to never forget her daughter. St. Louis Homicide Commander David Heath took the letter seriously and turned the case over to Detective Chris Pappas. As Pappas dug into the Dinwiddie case, he uncovered a disturbing connection. The original informant in the case was a then 14-year-old teenager named Nathan Danny Williams, who had implicated a friend in the murder. But as Pappas began investigating Williams' background, he discovered that Williams had a history of violent crime, including a conviction for the rape of a 13-year-old girl in 1979. He was also serving a life sentence for the rape and sodomy of a 10-year-old girl in 1989. This new information about Williams raised alarms, and soon enough, investigators began connecting him to other cold cases, including the disappearance of Gina Brooks. Through their investigation, Pappas, Despain, and FBI agent Bill Francis discovered that Williams' brother had a close friend who lived near Gina's home. Williams had been in the area frequently and had a known connection to the neighborhood. The noose appeared to be tightening around Williams. He was eventually asked to take a lie detector test regarding Gina's disappearance, but he failed. The connection between Williams and Gina became clearer as investigators started piecing together the details of that fateful night in August 1989. Williams' friends, Bryant Squires and Timothy Ballou, would soon be implicated in Gina's abduction. The investigation showed that all three had been involved, though the details of their roles in the crime remained unclear for many years. Over the years, the search for Gina continued. The FBI employed various tactics, including using subterranean probing tools, and even enlisted the help of psychics. They drained quarries and dug up freezers on suspects' farms, but nothing of substance turned up. The investigation spanned across the country, from Canadian Mounties to the Cayman Islands, but still, there was no sign of Gina. In an unorthodox move, the FBI produced a videotape detailing the case and distributed it to prisoners in the Missouri Department of Corrections. The hope was that someone within the prison system might have information on Williams or his involvement in other crimes. Inmates, as they often do, have their own code of conduct, particularly when it comes to crimes involving children. This strategy eventually yielded results. 2 names kept coming up: Bryant Squires and Timothy Ballou. Squires, Williams' best friend, would later die of cancer in 1996, but not before making a deathbed confession to 2 nurses. He reportedly admitted to his involvement in Gina's abduction and murder. Squires allegedly told the nurses that he had been the driver of the station wagon that night, while Williams had held Gina in the back seat and killed her. Although Squires made similar confessions about other crimes, some of these confessions were later proven to be untrue. Detectives were convinced that Timothy Ballou had been the 3rd person in the station wagon that night. Ballou would later be charged with second-degree murder in Gina's case after allegedly telling investigators that he had seen Williams kill Gina. However, Ballou's story changed multiple times, and eventually, the charges were dropped. He was then charged with lying to the FBI about the location of Gina's remains, and he pled guilty, receiving a 30-month prison sentence. Ballou would later be convicted of sexually assaulting a 7-year-old girl in 1990 and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Today, he still resides in the Fredericktown area, though police officials have described him as unstable and unreliable. Finally, in 1998, nearly 9 years after Gina went missing, Nathan Danny Williams was charged with murder. Despain, Pappas, and Francis had worked tirelessly on the case, and it was Pappas who personally served Williams with the murder warrant in his prison cell. Williams wasn't surprised when Pappas walked in. He reportedly said, "How did you get all this?" The case seemed to be building to a resolution. However, in 2003, the murder charge was dropped due to concerns about the possibility of double jeopardy. The prosecution feared that they might not win the case, and if acquitted, they would lose any chance of retrying Williams for Gina's murder. Prosecuting attorney Dwight Robbins explained that they needed to ensure they had enough evidence for a conviction before proceeding to trial. With Williams already locked away for life on the rape charge, the prosecution believed they had time to build a stronger case. There is no statute of limitations on kidnapping or murder, and authorities vowed to keep investigating. They hoped that eventually, new evidence or even a confession from Williams would emerge. As of today, Williams is serving a life sentence in a Missouri prison and will not be eligible for parole until 2039. It's been over 30 years since Gina's disappearance, and the case remains open. While the original investigators have retired, the case is still considered active. Eric Hovis, the current police chief in Fredericktown, was born and raised in the town and has vowed to see the case through to the end. He understands the pain of losing a child, having lost a daughter at birth himself. He says he can't even begin to imagine the pain that Gina's mother, Cindy Box, has endured over the past 3 decades. Despite all the years that have passed, hope persists. Hovis believes that one day, the case will be solved. The investigation remains active, and tips continue to come in. With the advancement of technology, Hovis believes that one day, a new lead could provide the breakthrough needed for closure. In the end, the story of Gina's disappearance is a painful reminder of the slow and often frustrating nature of the justice system. There is overwhelming evidence against Nathan Williams, and yet he remains unconvicted for Gina's murder. The fight for justice continues, and for Cindy Box, there will be no peace until her daughter's killer is brought to justice.